They called her the foreign wife, a stranger, a shadow in the story of a prophet. But what if Zipporah was never meant to be a background name in Moses' journey, but a divine protector with fire in her soul and thunder in her hands? Welcome to Biblical Stories, where forgotten voices rise, royal hearts confess, and women of the Bible reclaim their crowns. Here, we tell the untold, the emotional, the sacred, through their eyes.
I was never supposed to be part of his story, not the way they tell it now. I came from the mountains of Midian, barefoot and unknown, daughter of a priest, keeper of sacred things whispered by the wind in tents soaked in prayer and blood, and when he arrived, dusty, broken, running from a murder and a past he couldn't bury, I saw not a fugitive, but a flame. I didn't marry a prophet, I married a man who hadn't yet heard God's thunder, only the silence of his own guilt, and I carried that silence. With him, braided it into our journey, into our children, into the nights we crossed deserts without maps, just faith. No one tells you how lonely it is to love a chosen man, how many times I stood behind while he stood before miracles. While he argued with God on mountaintops, I washed the blood of circumcision from my hands, trembling, alone, because if I hadn't acted that night, if I hadn't cut our son with trembling fingers and fierce belief, the angel would have taken him, taken Moses too, because covenant isn't comfortable, and salvation isn't sterile. I saved the man who would part seas, and they never even said my name in the story. I remember the look in his eyes when he saw what I had done, horror, yes, but also awe, because I did what he couldn't. I stepped between the divine and death without flinching, and that moment was not weakness, it was warriorhood. The same blood that marked our child marked me as more than a wife. I became the sword that night, the intercessor, the unsung high priestess of a moment that shifted history under the silence of stars. You think obedience looks like soft voices and still hands, but it looks like midnight screams and the courage to wound your own child for a covenant you barely understand. I didn't need a title to be royal, didn't need a crown to be holy, because when God came for judgment, I stood in his way with nothing but a flint knife and faith. They say women are too fragile for leadership, but tell me, who bled for the future of Israel when Moses froze in fear? I walked behind him as he faced Pharaoh, yes, but never beneath him. My role was not on the platform, it was in the shadows, the silence, the sacred work that never gets told from pulpits. But heaven saw me, and I carry no bitterness for being forgotten by men because I was chosen by God to be the womb, the warrior, and the warning. He was the prophet, but I was the threshold, the moment the divine almost turned away, and I called it back with my bare hands. How many women throughout time have done the same, unrecorded, unnamed, but eternally remembered in the rooms of heaven where obedience matters more than recognition? They don't tell the story of the tent, of the flint, of the cry that broke through the angel's wrath, but I do. I carry it in my bones, in the long quiet years after Egypt, when the miracles became memories and I became a mother whose sons carried the legacy of a rescue no one saw coming. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't acted, if I'd waited for Moses to lead in a moment meant for me. Would Israel have had its deliverer, or would the story have ended in a tent in Midian, with 2 corpses and a silence too heavy to lift? I didn't wear silk or sit on thrones, but I ruled in the place where life and death kissed each other on the edge of a covenant. They say I was just a shepherd's wife, but my hands shaped the future, my blood sealed the promise, and my silence covered a scream that could have ended everything. Even now, as they write songs about him and carve his face into history, I remain unspoken, but not unknown. There is a place for women like me in the halls of the divine, women who act when others hesitate, who bleed to protect the vision, who stand in the space between failure and fulfillment and say, not this time. I am Zipporah, daughter of a priest, wife of a prophet, mother of a future, and I do not need the world to remember my name, because heaven already has it written in flame.
If you are enjoying this video, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to help this channel reach more people. Now let's continue.
They think silence means submission, but my quiet was never surrender, it was strategy. I knew the weight of timing, the cost of interrupting destiny, and the sacredness of letting a man discover his voice while I held the world steady in the background. I was not invisible, I was intentional, because not every fire needs to roar to consume, some flames burn slow and deep and unyielding. I watched him lead plagues and part oceans, but I also watched him break under the burden of 1,000,000 souls. And when his hands trembled and his face aged under the glory, I reminded him with just one look that he was still human, still mine, still the man I married when he was nothing but a shadow running from his own name. There were nights he couldn't sleep, haunted by the weight of freedom, and in those nights, I became the refuge. I was his wilderness before the wilderness. I held his confusion, his doubt, his exhaustion, and offered no judgment, only presence. Sometimes the most divine thing you can offer is staying when everything in them is unraveling. I was not there for the burning bush, but I knew the scent of divine fire long before Sinai. My ancestors had walked barefoot in deserts of revelation, and I carried that same blood, wild, unshaken, ready. I didn't need God to call my name out loud to know I was chosen to stand beside a man who would change history. And yet, when the story was written, they left me out. They mentioned me in passing, a footnote in a legend. But what they don't see is that every legend rests on the unseen sacrifices of women who carried the weight in silence, who sharpened the flint, who obeyed when no one was watching. I wasn't perfect. I had anger, I had fears, I questioned the path more than once, but never did I abandon the assignment. Because something deep in me knew that my presence mattered even when my name didn't, that God was watching the way I showed up, not the way the world responded. The hardest part of being me wasn't the distance, the wandering, or the silence. It was knowing I was always one step behind the stage, knowing the miracles I witnessed would be told without my part in them. But I chose to believe that heaven documents differently, that God sees every hidden act and names it sacred. Even when I returned to my father's house and Moses continued the journey without me, I didn't collapse into bitterness. I raised my sons with stories of justice and fire, told them the truth of a God who spares no one from transformation, not even the women who stand beside prophets and hold their secrets in the dark. If I could speak now to every woman who feels forgotten in someone else's calling, I'd say this: you are not forgotten. You are the frame that holds the masterpiece, the silence that makes the trumpet sound louder, the storm before the revelation. Do not despise your hiddenness, it is holy ground. When they write the next stories, I hope they'll look for the Zipporahs, the ones with blood on their hands and heaven in their eyes, the ones who dared to interrupt death with obedience, who shaped deliverance with trembling fingers, who knew when to speak and when to act, and when to simply stay. I am not just a name in a genealogy, I am legacy. I am covenant in motion, sacrifice in silence, faith with a pulse, and even if the world never says it, I was a queen in a wilderness court, crowned not with gold but with the weight of divine purpose. So don't wait for the world to recognize you, beloved. Walk like heaven already has. Because in the end, our stories are not for applause, they are for eternity.
If this story awakens something in you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Biblical Stories and share this video with someone who needs to remember the power of women who move history in silence. Your story matters, just like Zipporah's.